Today we're talking about polling, which is an extremely important subject, yet is not very well documented or openly discussed online within the alarm monitoring industry. So we're going to be discussing that today, especially around the subject of managed polling. Now, managed polling is very important to monitoring centres because it ensures that the monitoring centre operator can be 99.9% sure if there is or isn't an issue with devices such as alarm communicators out on site, and this reduces the number of false poll fails. Today we have on the line Luke Kavanagh and Carl Norman from Suretek, who are going to be talking about managed polling. So probably a good place to start is if we could get, maybe Carl, if you could give us a definition of what polling is.
So polling is a term that we use to describe sending a unique packet of data from a device to a server, and then that server responds to that specific packet saying that I got that packet. It needs to be a bi-directional communication that is authenticated and labeled as an individual unique packet that is responded to from both ends.
Right, so that's obviously the technical definition of polling. Can we now take a step back from that and look at how it applies in terms of, say, a site where you've got a security system and an alarm panel, and then the communication between that and the control room? How does the polling apply in that instance in layman's terms?
I guess to clarify what Carl was saying, the point of polling is to ensure that the path is always available when the time comes to actually send an alarm event. So what we're doing is sending heartbeats or small packets of data across the network that we're going to be sending alarm events across. This ensures that we know that the network is always available, so when it does come time to send the event, the path will be there to send that alarm event across.
Right. And something else I wanted to bring up early in this discussion, you touched on it before we started the podcast, is that there are differing classes of polling available and they're priced accordingly, and each of the classes caters to the varying needs of the site depending on the application. So can you give us a quick rundown on what the classes are and how they differ?
So the classes of polling are based around the communication standard. There's 5 classes of polling. There's 1 hour polling, there's 24-hour polling, there's 40-second polling, or there's all these different rates. The polling classes, as per the standard, is a definition of how long it must take to notify the control room from when a device has failed to communicate within a certain time frame. You know, you might have a 1 hour window where you must communicate within that 1 hour. And if it doesn't communicate within that 1 hour, you need to notify the control room to say, nothing has happened for this hour. We are not able to communicate.
But I think that's where the misconceptions come into it, is that everybody has taken the fault recognition time as the polling time. So like what Carl said, if the Australian standard states that this class of monitoring must have a 1 hour fault recognition time, they interpret that as we must poll that device every hour. And what they're doing is not allowing them enough time to analyze or ensure that it's actually lost communication or just a lost data packet.
I don't think anyone does this now, but I know a trick that someone in the industry was doing where they were just checking to see if the communication channel was open at each end.
Are you saying this is a service provider you're talking about?
Someone that provides communication equipment for alarm communicators.
Right.
Their idea of polling was checking that the data stream, like a TCP connection, even a radius server connection, was available. And it said, okay, if it's registered on the radius, therefore there must be a data path there. So that isn't a poll. That is just saying that this device is registered on the network level. Or if you say, is this TCP connection open? That's just saying, is the low-level data stream there? We make sure we go right down to the lowest level and say, we have sent the equivalent of an alarm. So we've basically sent a full alarm message from our device through the network right down to a server. The server looks at the packet and says, okay, this is packet labeled XYZ. And it responds and says, I got packet XYZ.
Yeah, and that's what the Australian standards calls for.
So let's take a 1 hour plan, so that Suretek offers, as opposed to what others are offering in terms of 1 hour plans. What's the difference in real world scenario? What are the difference in terms of impact?
We've taken it to the next level and said, we poll at a rate of 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, we send a validated round trip return packet complete from device through the network back down to the device and say, yes, we've got this at 10-minute intervals. Now, the reason we do that is, one, we can monitor things at a much faster rate to ensure greater reliability in the network. Two, we're very well aware of the status of the device. We actually send through reasons for dropouts, all sorts of statistical data about that link for that device, including signal strengths. Let's say we've just got a poll. So we've got 1 more hour before we need to notify the control room of potential outage. So what we're doing is saying 10 minutes into that hour, let's send another poll down the communication path. So our system has 50 minutes to recover the connection. Let's say we didn't do it at 10 minutes. Let's say we did it at 55 minutes. So we're only giving ourselves 5 minutes to recover and communicate before we have to send a poll fail. And if you literally poll at 1 hour, if that packet doesn't get through, you're going to poll fail straight away because the packets didn't go through and it had to cycle the connection.
And if the alarm system is on a slow or poor quality 1 hour plan, as you've just described, which, let's say, for example, it only allows a few minutes to verify whether or not the poll fail is true, how does that in turn impact the alarm monitoring centres?
Well, they're the face of everything, and they're in the hardest position of all because at the end of the day, you need to treat a poll fail as an alarm event. You need to basically follow your process for that, which may mean phoning the client. And when you're getting a percentage of false poll fails coming to screen, these are a lot of decisions that operators are having to make that could impact their relationship with their client, because if they're calling all the time with false poll fails, that can only be a negative experience for the client and lead to not having confidence in the product. Now, when you have devices that are continually sending through poll fails, the natural inclination is to start ignoring those events. But it's a slippery slope once you start doing that, because it only takes that one true poll fail to come through that you ignore that leads to a break-in or loss of life or assets. So that there is a real conundrum for every control room, in that the operators are put in the position to make that decision when they just shouldn't have to make that decision. It should be, if there's a poll fail, you need to act on it. There should be no ifs or buts or having to make a decision on that. And I think traditionally the poll fails that have been coming from wireless alarm communicators has led to a more relaxed approach or an acceptance of these false poll fails coming to screen in control rooms, which I don't think is acceptable. So that's why we've always done everything we can to minimize the chance of false poll fails into a control room.
So what happens in that instance? The control room calls the site and says
we've lost communication to your site. You know, you need to follow whatever their predetermined procedure is for lost communication.
And at what point is it realised that it's a false poll fail?
When it comes back online a few minutes later after they've made the phone call.
Right.
Their field devices tried to reestablish. It's established that communication. So 5 minutes after the hour, it's come back online, or 10 minutes or 30 minutes after the hour, it's come back online. So they've made the call, they've made the customer aware, they've actioned an alarm, they've taken that operator off 100 other jobs they should be doing and clogged the system up. Imagine this on a scale of, okay, so 5 years ago, people might have had hundreds, or big control rooms have thousands of these things out there. These days, there's tens of thousands of communicators out there. So this false poll fail issue is now something any control room is aware of, because it puts a big load on their staff to be able to try and manage these poll fails. And you need a device that is actually managing this properly and won't deliver false poll fails. You need to know that if there's a poll fail, it's an actual poll fail. It's not just the system has issues in it where things get a little bit slow or they're a little bit tightly timed. Our approach has been to send a lot more data a lot more often to be well within the standard. So our polling rates, we're down at 10 minutes. So we know that if there is a short-term outage or a couple of things go wrong, you've still got 50 minutes to get that communication channel back up. Now, if we only had 5 minutes, the probability of getting those false poll fails is much, much higher.
As we've been talking through this, I've been picturing in my mind how the polling plans would look from the Bureau's perspective, because I'd imagine everyone's offering a 1 hour plan, but based on what you're saying is that they're not all the same. Do you think the Bureaus understand the differences between the available plans?
No one really is. Like, it's not something we put in brochures or put on our website or anything like that. It's just something that we've always done because it's the right way to do things. And I know back in the beginning when we first started with this, people were polling, for example, once an hour, and their criteria of a poll fail was 2 missed polls, and that's 2 hours. So from the beginning, we've always had that intelligence built into our polling plans.
So the others are not offering this to conserve data costs? Has that been their reason?
I would assume that that'd be part of it. I don't think there's as much transparency. Like, for example, with Tech Tools and Alarm Link, the phone apps, the client can literally see every polling packet that's come from the system. So you can open up Alarm Link and say view alarm history, and you'll see straight away every poll that's come through. So you can very quickly see that we poll at 10 minutes. There's no hiding what we do. We're very transparent because we genuinely believe we're doing the right thing by the control room, the customer, and everybody by saying, hey, here's every single poll. You can literally look at it and see it all happening. So
this is available for the bureaus then. They can use an app, and from the app they can access that data.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that's the transparency is so important, and that's what's allowed us to produce Alarm Link and Tech Tools. Is we're not looking to hide any data. We want people to see it. We want this information out there. By doing that has allowed us to then provide better services to installers and to the end user through having that transparency.
Just getting back to the point you're making about Suretek's 1 hour plan, obviously you have lots of options in terms of the polling plans. I'm just using the 1 hour plan as an example. Just something I thought of, if you're polling every 10 minutes so that you're not getting false poll fouls, that's obviously an advantage. But I'd also imagine, just playing the devil's advocate here, that it would also mean you're using more data across the network.
Yeah.
So does that mean there's an additional data cost that bureaus need to factor in?
Yeah, it is. But the result is we think it's the right way to do things. We don't see it as there any alternative to doing it this way because it's the way to do it in order to provide a reliable service. We're still on par with everybody else as far as pricing is concerned with data. We certainly don't charge more or pass on 6 times the data usage that we're potentially using.
So you're not charging for the upload and download, is that
Yeah,
the point?
That's another feature of our solution, and I guess a byproduct of our partnership with the telcos, in that they're looking to support Suretek and what we're doing in the industry, and they support us with very good pricing. And this allows us to include the data usage associated with uploads, downloads into that standard data plan. With all the data plans, we also provide Alarm Link, which is the end user app. So all the data that's associated with that app, with communicating with the alarm system, the monitoring center, et cetera, that's all included in the data plans.
I think it's significant that even on the 24-hour plan where we poll at 1 hour, you still get your remote upload download. You can still dial into your panel, change your user settings. So you're still giving the customer that level of service, and you can still use the apps. You've still got Alarm Link. You've still got Tech Tools. So it's all there and included as part of this 24-hour plan.
So even with the lowest class, you're still getting the access.
Yeah, it's all included. Absolutely, yeah.
Just playing the devil's advocate once more, what happens if the network goes down, like the IP network, that tends to be unreliable? What happens between the multi-com alarm communicator and the control room? How is that handled?
Our ability to recover from even an IP outage is second to none, because we can go from talking on IP and then you go to a voice channel, you're working on something that's O rated, you've got a much higher reliability. So even when, let's say we've lost Telstra and Optus IP paths, we can then go, okay, well, one of them still had a voice channel. Let's go to the voice channel, make a poll or voice call alarm. And that way we've got 4 fully independent functioning paths to talk on.
And this is in a day, Simon, when the majority of IP communicators are turning their voice channel off. So we have the complexities of managing, I guess, these devices from a different type of platform that has voice availability. And we also face the complexities of managing the billing and the extra costs associated with voice alarm calls and things like that too. But again, we just feel it's the right way to do things. So we go to that extra mile in order to provide the best service to the industry.
Right. Well, before we wrap up the podcast, it probably is a good idea if you provide us with a quick 20-second pitch on the Suretek polling packages that you have available.
Yeah. We provide plans that cover every service classification of the Australian standards, all the way from Class 2 24-hour plans through to the highest classification, which is Class 5. We also have a Class 2 Plus, which is a 1 hour plan. That's the one that we went into where we poll every 10 minutes. Class 3, which is a 70-second plan. Class 4, which is a 40-second plan. And the Class 5, which basically you have to have dual Ethernet and IP wireless in order to achieve that level of classification. So we poll wirelessly every 20 seconds and also on Ethernet every 10 seconds.
Okay, so let's say there is a bureau listening to this who is interested in switching over. They're aware of the false poll fail issues and they want to get something more accurate. What's involved? Is it a complicated transition? What do they need to do?
Mate, I think what a bureau needs to do if they want to take advantage of these services and this transparency of polling and the increased polling rate and the reduced poll fails and all the things that we're offering, it all comes as part of the package of Multicom and the Sure Poll network. So as long as their control room supports it, then yeah, simply contact either their control room or us, and we can point them to the right people to buy the hardware that supports all this.
And just to finish off, Carl, you were saying earlier that you had access to some figures that gives you granular insight into the managed polling service that Suretek offer. Do you want to share those figures with us?
Yeah, I've got them open on my screen, and I can see for a block of 10,000 panels, we had 4 poll fails in one 24-hour period. And those panels, if I go in and find that actual panels causing that, the 4 that I can see there is the same panel 4 times, and that panel has very poor signal and needs to have a high gain. But there's clients out there that don't want to go back out to site, or it takes them a few weeks to get back to site. So, we look into these panels and go, okay, so out of a block of 10,000, you're talking about 4 poll fails in a 24-hour period. It was one panel and it's got a signal issue. They've been notified and they've decided that they're happy to just deal with it as it is. Out of a block of 10,000 panels, that's a really decent amount. We've got one panel. And yeah. Well, it's really zero, right? Because they're aware of that. It comes up and they go, oh, we'll just put it on hold, or, that's up to the control room. When you're talking that bigger number and that smaller amount of poll fails, that's when you can start to say, okay, our reliability levels are up there, where when you get a poll fail, it's something wrong. And in this case, that's something wrong with that panel that I was looking at there. It's got low signal. So there's not really anything wrong. It's just a case of they haven't been back out there to put a high gain on. So, you're talking about some pretty reliable numbers when it comes down to that sort of block of hardware out there.
And that's some interesting insights from Carl Norman and Luke Kavanagh from Suretek, discussing the intricacies of polling. So hopefully this podcast has armed you with enough information to ask the right questions to ensure that the polling that you're getting from your alarm monitoring centre at the very least adheres to the Australian standards. If you have any questions about any of the topics discussed in today's podcast, get in contact with Suretek on 1300 65 4433. And you can also reach them online at suretek.com.au.